Nice to see everyone today. Thank you so much for joining our Growth of the Build-to-Rent sector. This is a hugely exciting topic. I think that it's so interesting to have different types of conversations, and we want this panel to be very collaborative and everyone talking amongst each other, so please, I encourage that. We're going to do quick introductions. My name is Michela Hancock. I am Managing Director of Development and Construction at Greystar, and we came into the build-to-rent space and the student space 6 years ago in the UK. We manage 500,000 units globally in 150 markets, and it's been really interesting coming into the UK, learning about the market, seeing the differences in the US versus the UK, and going along this journey with the growth of this sector. It's been hugely exciting working together with a lot of our so-called competitors. We like to call everyone friends, so I think it's been very collaborative, and I'm so excited to see the next wave of the build-to-rent. So anyway, I think we'll all take about 3 minutes to introduce ourselves, talk about what your company's doing in the build-to-rent space.
Great, thanks. My name is Kotecha. I'm from AmroLiving. AmroLiving is Amro Real Estate Partners' build-to-rent platform that we've established not so long ago. So just to give you a bit of background, we're slightly unconventional, if you like. My co-founder and I are both economists by training and background. We actually don't have that many typical RE sector professionals with us. We tend to recruit quite widely, which I think is a great strength of ours. We went about 11 or so years ago, we took our cue from the GFC and looked for defensive, counter-cyclical asset classes within real estate that we could invest in, and student accommodation fitted the bill perfectly with its robust income streams and its big sort of supply-demand gap at the time, and we went into that. And within that, we then scoped down to our niche, which at that time was postgraduate studies. After the global financial crisis, I don't know if you recall, but education and further education was quite a safe haven for many who had suffered attrition, and we went into that sector, and not long ago, about a couple of years ago, we then looked at build-to-rent, having very similar income and counter-cyclical defensive characteristics as student. We studied the sector which is called multifamily in the US, and it's done phenomenally well over the last 25 years. Michela can tell us more about Greystar's experience there, which is amazing. And we saw the opportunity to not only serve our student demographic within the residential sector, but we saw a broader opportunity for good quality, purpose-built, managed residential. And clearly, I mean, we're not going to be able to answer the housing crisis issues ourselves. We're a small part of that sector, but I think we can challenge the sector's thinking, the conventional thinking, by coming up with a product category that is robust and essentially decoupled from the housing cycle, if you like. So that's where we're at. AmroLiving is a tech-enabled real estate business, as we'd like to see it being called, and we tend to want to be nimble about about our product mix and our product design, and also how we operate and service our customers. So I'll talk more about that later.
Hi, I'm Rosanna. I'm the Acquisition and Development Manager at You. You are placemakers, developers, designers. We are the #1 residential brand in the world. We've got 52 projects around the globe, and we're now moving into the build-to-rent sector, which we find quite interesting because in the UK, branded residences hasn't really been a thing. We struggled to get branded residences off the ground in the UK, but as we look in the build-to-rent market, you see that places like TP and things like that, brands are now becoming more well-known. So it's quite an interesting space for us to take what we've been doing for the last 20 years and apply it to a new product. I guess where I fit in all of this, I actually run the small asset investment and development team, but I am also the token millennial that gets wheeled into the office when we're working on products and things like that, and I go, no, that's not right for the market, no, you need to change that, like, nobody wants to live there, who is your target market, blah, blah, blah. So I kind of I guess I put all my beliefs and trends onto the product to make us relevant to the build-to-rent market. And yeah, we're doing exciting stuff. We're working on building the brand, working with younger professionals at the moment to really create the brand at the beginning rather than retrospectively, so it's quite an interesting place to be in the market.
I think that's hugely interesting as well because, again, that interaction with the potential consumer, I think it's very important to have your insight and that, it's not just for one type, that there's a huge range in that target market as well. So we need to be listening to our customers and, taking their feedback and incorporating it into what we're doing on the development side.
Of course, and the best time to do that is before you even start building, right?
Exactly. All right, well, thank you. Over to Matthew.
Hi, I'm Matthew Pullen. I look after the build-to-rent program at EcoWorld London. EcoWorld's a Malaysian development group, as some of you might know. It's only fairly recently established in the UK. My background wasn't residential. I became involved in it about 8 years ago, and that was really driven by two things. Firstly, looking at the sector, seeing what had happened in student accommodation and believing that as preferences for our target market were changing from product towards experience, that the residential sector seemed to be out of step with what was going on. The second thing was noticing that pension funds at the time were, after 2008, were really short of reliable, long-dated, inflation-linked income and looking for stuff to invest in. It just seemed to me that putting those two things together was an obvious thing to do. So that translated itself into me launching a company called Be Here at the start of 2013. That was one of the first specialist build-to-rent developer operators in London. 5 years on, as that started to grow, it was acquired by EcoWorld as part of a wider corporate deal that saw EcoWorld establish itself with a team in London.
That's great. I appreciate that from everyone. And I just wanted to give a quick statistic to talk about the growth of the build-to-rent market. So in the latest report on build-to-rent for 2019 from the British Property Federation, from Savills and Mollior, we have 72,000 units in planning in the UK. We have 37,000 under construction, and we have 30,000 complete. And that is a 13% increase from 2018 totals. So I think that just shows you the appetite from developers, contractors, I think, different types of companies coming into this space. And I think that also the appetite from institutional investors is just growing. So I think, again, this is a hugely relevant topic, and I really encourage a lively debate during this. So let's start out. For Ami, I want to talk a bit about sustainability. And what parameters are you planning to build into your design for build to rent? I know a lot of people talk about sustainability, but what does that actually mean to you?
Right, so obviously it's a very topical issue. It's been brought back to the table in some ways by what's gone on recently with Extinction Rebellion and all the furore about sustainability, and rightfully so. I think the built environment has a massive responsibility to deliver on this sustainability agenda. We've got we've got a scenario where we are responsible for a huge amount of the energy consumption on the planet, and we are also responsible for a lot of the greenhouse gas issues. So that's most definitely on the agenda, has always been with Amro. As far as student accommodation goes, I mean, we've got a 100% track record of delivering BREEAM excellent schemes. Some people might think that's just a tick box exercise, but actually, the reality is that whole discipline of doing a BREEAM excellent exercise makes you much more rigorous in your design capabilities and your design standards. We are looking at applying a similar sort of scenario to build to rent, but I think what we're going to do this time, and we're looking at this very closely right now, is to open up the discussion and make it more holistic. So sustainability can be many different things to different people. And the whole well-being issue, I think, is also very much on our agenda. Looking at inside-out design parameters that mean that, well-being in terms of indoor air quality, measuring performance of, our temperature control methodologies, etc., is really important. Also, I mean, build to rent can be so many, the opportunity and the canvas is so broad for sustainability. So if you really take it to another level, it's all about human-centered design now. And we are really looking at it from that perspective. What kind of place do people want to call home? When you come back home after a hard day at work, you want the familiarity, you want the sociability, you want the feeling of this is where I'd like to live. And that can mean a lot of things, not just ambient temperatures and air quality. It's about how we extend our design to create an empathy with our tenants and our customers. We consider all of that to be part of the mixed bag of sustainability, as you call it. So everything from the rigor of building fabric and looking at options that are sustainable in the green sense, to making a place really somewhere that somebody wants to call home to live in.
Are you, sorry, can I just ask a question?
Go ahead,
please.
Please.
Using the well guidelines and things like that, and are you applying that to your buildings? Because I know that it's very big in the US and kind of it's becoming more utilised in the UK. So I just wonder if that's part of your sustainability.
Interesting. Interesting that you asked that, Rosanna. Well has done phenomenally well in the corporate occupier market. Commercial property in the US, and it's also showing that in the UK. In the residential sector, it hasn't been applied in the same way. But actually what we're doing, and I think we're just taking a very practical approach, that we want to build in the preconditions for well into our design guide. And if that happens, because that has to happen when the scheme's on the drawing board, stage 3 design, or even earlier if possible, then you actually create a foundation from which you can take it forward. You can future-proof using well in that sense. You can build on, and one thing about well is it really it is super for retrofitting as well. It has an ability for retrofit, so we can experiment as we go along. But having the preconditions in place is key. Otherwise it's difficult later on. Yeah.
I think it's hugely important as well. And I'm just curious, how much are your customers asking about sustainability, or do they just expect it?
So we have our first build-to-rent scheme on the drawing board.
Okay.
But we've been doing a lot of research, and absolutely sustainability there's a whole vernacular around sustainability, and if you really look into it, like I said before, I think customers are asking for well-being. Customers are asking for how is this building going to, where is the energy going to come from? What are you doing about green energy? How are you building insulation in? How is this, overheating is a massive issue. We're talking about a 5 degrees Celsius growth in terms of temperatures and summer temperatures, et cetera, going to extremes. And customers do want to know that. Are they going to be comfortable living in this property, come what may? And I think taking on those sound bites and incorporating them into design is really important, because the data will follow, I think, especially for this. I think the data will follow. The payback period might seem extremely long right now, but it's absolutely the right way to go.
I think it's also explaining to your customer base in a logical and kind of very clear way what exactly you're doing is very important as well. I think that's a great segue into chatting with Matthew a bit about generally the shift in the way people think of homes. So when we think of the residential sector, again, it's not just as a product, but a bundle of services and community and a lifestyle choice, which is that's a big shift into the way that we used to think about things. So can you talk a little bit about how you are approaching the relationship between the customer and your build-to-rent offering, and along with the community as well?
I think one of the first things that struck me in looking at the sector was the fact that there's a disconnect, it seemed to me, between house builders producing stock, a lot of it now being sold to overseas purchasers, let out by an agent, and somebody living in it. And I think one of the problems with that is that it means you've got a market that doesn't really function properly, because what the customers are actually after has no bearing on how much the developer gets paid. The developer's got no direct link to even get the feedback. And from that perspective, I think the it feels to me like the market is rather broken in that respect. And you don't need to look too hard at the way that property is marketed in London to figure out there's a bit of an issue. Because a lot, you don't have to look very hard to find examples of, property in East London aimed at people who like to spend their time in Shoreditch that's marketed with, as breathtaking contemporary apartments and designed in a kind of slightly lame boutique hotel type of a style, which, it only says there is no connection between the two. And I think the way that we always approached it was to try and bind these things together. And for build to rent to work properly, it's got to be a combination of three things working together, I think. One is, the interaction with the residents. One is the development side of it. And the third is the investment. Because those things, the whole thing will only function properly if one informs the other. It's got to be decisions about where to buy land, what to develop, what the mix should be. All of those things have got to be driven by resident experience in the first place. I think we're still, in truth, at the very early stages of working out how that plays through in terms of community. One of the things that's helpful from our Malaysian experience is that whilst the development that the company does in Malaysia is for sale, not for rent, the scale of it just means that you can't build places and walk away. And one of the sites at the moment we've already delivered 5,000 homes on the site, and there's another 500 acres to go before the development's finished. And in developing at that sort of scale, obviously you can't get away from the fact that people are going to be able to see what it's like to live there when they're making a choice about whether to buy. And that puts you in a much better mindset, I think.
It's very true. You're invested in the long term because you're going to be there.
Yes. I think one of the key things I learned early on from experience from the States, I suppose, was that there's a real focus there on community and tenant retention and encouraging people to want to stay there. And I think in London, because the market has had this undersupply of homes, and a lot of those homes not really being what a lot of 25 to 40-year-olds would want, it's enabled the market to be a bit lazy. And actually, it's useful to bring in some of that experience, both from Malaysia and the States, I think.
I think it's very true. It changes from being, it becomes more customer-centered, doesn't it? And we're trying to get feedback, and we want to keep the customers happy.
But it only works if your business model really relies on people paying more to live there, wanting to stay there, and that's how you generate profit. If it's all separated in house building and operation, it doesn't work.
However, if you are investing at scale, then you can be more efficient with your systems and your people and processes generally, and then it's a better experience, I think, for the consumer and just overall. I know a lot about what you're talking about on the feedback loop. I think is so critical because sometimes we tend to design in a vacuum, and I know that happens sometimes with us too. I really say to our teams, our design teams and our development team at Greystar, you need to get feedback from our existing developments. We've just opened up our first multifamily project in Canary Wharf. And I try to talk to the team whenever I'm there and say, what is the feedback? What are the customers telling you? What do they like? What don't they like? What spaces are they using? Which spaces do you never see them in? Because that's so important for us.
Well, from what we found so far, people are so willing to spend the evening. You might have to incentivize them with some pizza and a beer, but people are very willing to tell you what they like, what they don't like, and contribute towards the growth of the business, and then making the right decisions about the next thing we do.
Exactly. People just want to feel heard and valued. So, but I think we'll move on to talking about design in the build-to-rent market. So, Rosanna, I'd love your opinion on this. Like, how important is design in build-to-rent, and what can go wrong if design is an afterthought? Because I get told a lot of times from people, we look at a lot of schemes that come through our desk that are maybe already designed, and people say, we'll worry about the management, operational constraints later. And so I'm just curious your feedback on things like that.
I think design is hugely important. I think true build to rent is the actual genesis. If it doesn't look right, if it doesn't feel right, it's not going to work right. It's like any development. You know who your target market is before you start building, and then you build for that target market. If we're doing high-end residences in New York, we research our target market, we know what they want, and then we create the product. We don't retrospectively do it. And what we've seen in the build to rent market is that people have taken standard apartments and they've tried to shoehorn the build to rent concept into that standard apartment, and it's just not fit for purpose, and they're just not successful. So I think design is at the utmost important, and I think it's got to be at the beginning, right at the beginning, that first thought, what is the purpose for this, and how are we going to get there through our design?
It's so true, and it's hugely valuable, I've found, to have your operator sitting there with you, with your design team at the table at the beginning, like you say, from day one, talking through, like, how does this work? How does this work from the walk of the customer, from the walk of the operator? How does it actually practically work? And going through each piece, I know it sounds a little bit basic, but when you actually sit down with your design team and you say, okay, walk me to the front door, how does it work? How do you call the call box? How do you then, you know, if you have on-site teams, how does that work? How do they see the customer? How do they talk to the management team? All those things, it has to flow, or else your building doesn't operate effectively. One
thing that's quite apparent, you know, you see it a lot in the US, is the recognition that you've got to adapt. And the idea of, I don't like the title of build to rent at all, and I think it confuses people as to what the industry's about, because it's not, you know, it's not a construction thing. You know, we've got to get away from building stuff and then thinking that's it finished. But that, you know, a key part of it has got to be, you know, whatever you do to plan, people, you know, the way people use the building and people's needs over time are going to change. So that flexibility is, fundamental to it, I think.
But I think that's a massive part of the design. How how do we create it fit for purpose for today, and then how do we preempt what our needs in an ever-changing market are going to be in 5 years, and therefore how do we use things like design and technology to ensure that this product that we're creating is still relevant in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. And that's where it comes right back to the beginning. What do our target market want, and where is that going? And then how can we future-proof our product to ensure that in 15 years' time or whatever, it's still being used?
It's very true. I think that's a design challenge that we all have, is that the minute you specify something, you know, by the time it's being built, it's a couple years down the road. And how do you make sure you're keeping up with those technology shifts and changes?
And there's need for the investment side as well to keep up with that philosophy of the feedback loop. I mean, when you look at the main way today of funding build to rent, it's the forward funding model that's prevalent, and there is that disconnect already. The discussion that we're having now is one where you want to encourage a vertically integrated approach. So you want to have the developer having a stake, or at least a vested interest in the operator, and the whole design then hanging together in that basis. And the investment model doesn't necessarily support that to the extent it could, through JVs and partnerships that are very common in the US, but a while to go before they come to the UK.
I agree, it's a constant challenge. But on that topic, let's talk a bit about operations. So can you talk to me about your ideas for operations and how you're doing that at your company, and how important that is in the build to rent?
Yeah, so the one thing we've learned from our student experience is that the customer has to be the center of focus, and everything we've spoken about today, obviously, all of us think in that same way. We think of ops as being our secret sauce, really, at Amro, and we're really proud of what we do with our ops. We're very hands-on in terms of what we're trying to get in terms of messaging to the customer, also in terms of the feedback loops, etc. For a long time, it has been very much a human interaction, but as we scale, we know that we can only do it if we're properly tech-enabled. So at every point in our journey, we try and engage with technology to make that journey more pain-free. We're looking at all sorts of stuff right now, from the discovery to the conversion phase. So a lot of the discussion that's going on downstairs and on the other stage would be very applicable to what we're trying to do here. Everything from making that sort of good data, creating a good data foundation, if you like, on which to build our understanding of what our customers really want, what we talked about earlier, understanding and getting deeper insights into what our customers want, and being able to service them correctly. And we see that as like a gap between knowledge and service, if you like, if that makes any sense to you. It's when we have the knowledge to deliver the service, but it's how we deploy it, how we make our service on point, how we make that interaction, that human interaction on point and more acutely engaged. And we use technology in many ways to help us to do that. We really couldn't do it without that. So obviously we live in a mobile-first world. It's all about, we sit there designing our schemes on massive screens, but the decisions are made on tiny little handheld devices about whether to rent or not to rent. We've got to approach it very much from that customer perspective.